Well folks, this is a bit of a sad day for me. My 3D printer finally kicked the bucket after 3 years of faithful service. This is a model ANET A8, and I am pleased with the brand, so I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to be showing you in this video how to build the ANET A8 and configure it using Cura and level your bed and all the things you need to do to get ready. So say goodbye to this one. I'm going to be taking it apart for spare parts and we'll start building a new one. Before we get started on the assembly, I wanted to give you a preview of a project that I'm working that requires the use of the 3D printer. This is going to be a solar tracker that can charge a cell phone. So if you're interested in seeing this project, please subscribe to my channel and look forward to it in a future YouTube video. Once, of course, I get my 3D printer working again. So here I have my new 3D printer that just came in the mail. We'll be unboxing that momentarily. But before I do, I wanted to talk about a few upgraded parts that I've also purchased. Over here I have some MOSFETs, one for the hot plate and one for the nozzle. And these are good because they reduce the amount of power that flows through your control board, makes it less likely to have an issue with heat. And then also over here I have a 30 amp 12 volt power supply. It comes with a 20 amp, but in some circumstances you want that extra capacity. This model also has a cooling fan, which the one that comes with it does not. So when you're running this in the garage in the summer and it's hot, you want that extra cooling for your power supply. Okay, so what we have here, a small roll of PLA, got some linear bearings, little brackets and components, our cables, got a bracket for the hot plate, and here we have the hot plate itself. Look, also comes with some tools that we will need to put this thing together. Okay, so here on the next level we have the display, the motherboard. No idea what these are. They look like miniature condoms. Maybe we'll find out later. Some more bracket pieces. We also have our linear rods. Now for the next level, we have a power supply cord for the power supply, which, as I stated earlier, we're not going to use this one. We're going to use my upgraded one. We've got limit switches, fan, and heat sink for the nozzle. We got some cable shielding. We got our screws for the different axes. Some more brackets. Got a belt. Looks like it comes with a thumb drive. Probably instructions on this SD card. Looks like the extruder unit. All of our hardware. And different motors. Got a fan for our extruder nozzle. And this is one feature that's great about the A8 model. It's got upgraded Z-axis bearings. Now this next step isn't absolutely necessary, but me personally, I like the cleaner look without the paper on. So each one of these has acrylic covered in paper. It's really a pain to get it all off, but I recommend you just spend an hour and it'll look a lot better. Something I'm definitely noticing is that it's actually faster when you pull slow on these things. Another tip is that you always want to start on a corner that doesn't have all the cutouts and holes. Okay, I'm on the last piece, finally. Goodness sakes, this took about, I'd say more than an hour. Anyway, while you're doing this at home, you may want to go ahead and watch ahead in this video. That way, when you do get to the assembly portion, you'll be more familiar with it. The first step, we need these 4 pieces. We also need some M3 by 18 screws, and also some nuts. We're going to need 12 of each. So let's get those out and get ready to go. You may have noticed already that these pieces have some strange cutouts, and that is because anywhere you see that, you'll be putting a nut. So this is the general method of assembly for these parts. Alright, these are the next pieces you'll need, and they sit right on top. Here are the parts for the next step. We'll be installing the Y-axis limit switch, so make sure that the switch you grab has a Y on the label. And you'll need 2 of these little screws. Just going to line this piece up. Looks like we need the smaller screwdriver. Let me grab that real quick. They are a little bit tight, so you have to put a little elbow onto it. Alright, now once that piece is installed, we will be mounting it here on this plate. Okay, so once again you'll need a 3 by 18 screw and a nut, and from now on I'm not going to be focusing as much on how to do that. You're probably getting the hang of it by now. Now this next piece will mount right here. Now you need to find the Y motor and install this piece on top in this orientation. See how the hole's here? And the plug connector there. You'll have to use these M3 by 12 screws, 4 of them. I'm going to take the motor and mount it to this plate here, right there, and we'll use 2 more 3 by 18 screws to do so. Okay, now we want to take this cord and route it through this hole just below the motor. just like so. Now we need 4 more screws, and we'll install this on the back side of the assembly. Now we need this pulley assembly. We're going to install it on here. For the next step, open up the bag of threaded rods, and you're going to be selecting the 2 longest ones. We'll also be using these M8 washers and nuts. For the next step, we're going to need 2 of these shorter rods, 4 linear bearings, 4 of these lobes, 4 3x18 screws, and 4 nuts. You'll want to adjust these nuts right here so that these rods come just nearly flush with the front plate. You want them sunk in just a little bit so that these lobes will cover them up. Next, you'll want to find the hardware bag that has the 4x8s and the 4x14s. For this step, we will need 4 of the longer screws and 4 nuts. You'll also need 2 of these and the frame for the hot plate. Now, if yours comes with this protective coating on the aluminum, I recommend pulling it off. It only takes another second. For this next step, we will want the 4x8 screws, 16 of them. Now you may notice that this slide's a little bit rough. I like to use a little bit of air tool oil and just a few drops on each track. Helps quiet it up. Now we're going to install this belt. It's going to start here at this point, wrap around the pulley on the stepper motor, wrap around the pulley in the front here, and end here on the top. I'm going to cut it just a little bit long in case we have to play with it later. Now you'll see in other videos that these actually get mounted underneath. It really doesn't matter. I've found that mounting them on top gives you a little better belt tension. To install the hot plate, you're going to need 4 of these 3x30 screws, as well as the springs and wing nuts. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that this hot plate is covered with tape. That is great for the top because that helps your 3D prints adhere to the surface, but eventually you're going to want to replace this tape. So you'll notice that it wraps around the back. I'm going to trim this off so that it's easier to replace the tape without having to remove the hot plate every time. Now we're going to build the mounts for the Z-axis stepper drivers. You want to lay out these final pieces like this, making sure that this one's got the hole on the left, this one's got the hole on the right side. You'll need 10 more 3x18 screws and nuts. Now that we have the brackets installed, we can install the Z motors. You'll want to find the cables that are labeled Z. The short one will go with the motor on the left, the long one on the right, and you'll want to connect the end that is not labeled into the motor. That way when you connect your control board later, you have the label on that end. You're also going to need 8 of these 3x12 screws. Next we'll install the display. For this you'll need 4 3x30 screws, 8 nuts, and 4 of these 7mm long spacers. I'm going to find two matching plates. I went ahead and mounted the Z-axis limit switch to one of the plates. You want to line them up so that they overlap. We're going to use 30 millimeter long screws. We're going to install them just above this left Z motor. And I'm sure we will be adjusting this later, so don't crank them on too tight at this point. Alright, so we need two more of the shorter rods. We're going to install the linear bearings for the Z-axis. And we'll cover them up with some of these discs. Now it's time to install the lead screw. First of all, you're going to want to loosen these screws on this coupling. We don't want it down that low. We're going to want to bring it up about halfway up so that the top of the shaft is somewhere close to the middle of this coupling. You'll want to do this on both sides. Now we simply drop the threaded rod through this hole, feed it through the nut, and let it set down into the coupling. Now, you're going to want a gap between the shaft on the motor and the bottom of this screw. So you want to pull it up just a little bit from where it bottoms out so that the flexible coupling is able to do its job. So I've probably got a 1/16 of an inch gap in between the two. Okay, so I actually ended up bringing this coupling up a little bit and giving a little more space in between the coupling and the shaft. And this was because we need to make sure that the top of this is contained in this circle up at the top. So we'll do the same for the other side. Now it's very important that we level both of these sides. So we're going to use a ruler here, and we're going to raise each side up to the exact same height so that the rods that go across are level. Okay, now we can install these rods. You may need a mallet. In this top rod, we're going to include 2 linear bearings. Give it just a little tap. On the bottom, we're going to include one more bearing. Now we'll install the X motor using 4 of these 20mm screws. Now take out the extruder assembly and we're going to remove this screw and disconnect it from the bracket. Definitely hang on to this screw, we'll be using it in a few minutes. Alright, this next step's a little different. You want to get 2 of these 18mm bolts and get some nuts started on them. And then we're going to take our mounting plate on the back side. There's 3 threaded holes. We're going to use these 2 right here. You want to insert them just enough that you can get a nut on the other side. A little tight, you might have to use the screwdriver. And then we're going to install nuts on the back side. Just to keep them from falling out later. Okay, so it should look like that when you're finished. Now we need 12 of these M4x8 screws to mount the plate to the linear bearings. Now your kit should have some zip ties in it. We're going to use the rest of the belt. We're going to wrap it around this screw here and secure it with a zip tie. Okay, so I have the zip ties on and I gave them a snip with the pliers. Okay, now the tricky part, I need to feed the belt through this side, wrap it around the pulley of the motor, feed it over. There's a pulley inside of this bracket. And then we're going to end back at the screw. Okay, this is another part you'll want to follow closely. Take out your fan kit with the heatsink and the cage. You're going to have 2 of these long 45mm screws, we want to put 2 washers on each one. And then we're going to feed it through 2 of the holes on the cage. And then we want the motor, the fan motor, upright, so the cable's coming out the top. We want not the side with the sticker on, but the black side. We're going to stick these bolts through these holes. The heat exchanger has these 2 parts that are knocked out. That's where we're going to put the screws. Okay, we'll set that aside for a minute. Now we're going to take our extruder and we remove these 2 screws. Careful because it is spring loaded. You want to hold it in with your hand so that it doesn't come all apart. Try to compress the spring a little bit. This is a little bit tricky. And then we're going to insert the screws into these holes and try to get everything to line back up. All right, should look like that when you're finished. Cable on the top, extruder on the bottom. Now we'll install the extruder assembly onto the bracket. You remember that we removed this screw earlier that was already in this bracket. You may have to tilt it up to see the hole. Once you have the screw back in place, you want to tighten this nut up so the nozzle doesn't move around while we're doing things. Now we'll install the blower for the nozzle using 2 18mm screws. Be sure to find the plastic attachment, insert it into the fan. Next, pull out your power supply and your cable that came with it. This might look a little different since I am using an upgraded power supply, but the connections will be the same. Also, you note that I purchased some spade connectors at the auto parts store. Highly recommend that rather than just having the bare wires. But you're going to see some labels on your power supply. Brown goes to L or line, blue will go to neutral, and yellow will go to ground. Now if you're using the power supply that came with the kit, you're not going to have this same problem. The problem I have is the mounting holes on this plate don't match those on my power supply. So what I did is I took a piece of paper and punched holes to match that. Now I can simply flip this over, line them up on here, and drill holes to mount this. Now you'll notice I have some space in between the power supply and the frame, and that's to help with cooling. So I just 3D printed some spacers. You can do that regardless of which power supply you end up using. Okay, next you'll want to connect your power cable to the power supply. You want to make sure that red goes to positive, black goes to negative. On my power supply there are 3 of each. This power cable came with a fuse, which is a great idea, 20 amp fuse. It really doesn't matter which end of the cable you connect to the power supply. Alright, next take out your control board. You're going to want to orient it so that the SD card is pointing upwards. We're going to be using 30mm screws and these spacers. I mentioned before that I'm going to be installing a MOSFET upgrade, and I think this is a great idea. Otherwise, all the power going to the hot plate and the extruder nozzle are going through this board, and this board can overheat and be damaged easily. These MOSFETs allow the power to go directly from the power supply to those components. I want to mount them somewhere on the side here, up high enough where I can get my SD card in and out. And so once again, I've used my paper template, and I will drill out some holes. Next, find your X-end limit switch. Alright, we're on the home stretch. Now to hook up the wires. We already hooked up the power cables to our DC power supply, and I have routed those below, as you can see here, through these holes. And I've connected them to the board. Now normally we would be connecting these to the bed and extruder nozzle, but we're going to do things a little different with this MOSFET upgrade. I've got some red and black 16 gauge cable, and I'm going to be adding these end connectors you can get at the auto parts store. And what I'm going to be doing with these is building cables that connect the power supply to the MOSFETs. We're going to route the same path as the other power cable. I want to give these a little bit of a twist. Slide the connector. So there's a little bit of copper sticking through. And these tools are nice because they're color coded. You can see there, maybe I'll make it a little brighter. We got red, blue, and yellow. We're going to be using red. Wiring it this way, we should use all of the terminals on the power supply. 3 on the left, the red ones, are positive 12 volts. The next 3, the black 3, are negative 12 volts. And I've routed them the same path through the bottom and they're coming up to the MOSFETs. Now, just to keep it straight, we'll make the MOSFET on the bottom for the hot plate. The MOSFET on the top will be for the extruder. One very important thing before I forget is to check the voltage setting on your power supply. Most power supplies will have an option between 220 volts and 110 volts. So I've got mine set to 110 because I'm here in the United States, but you'll want to check what your voltage is or your power supply will not work. Next, find the cable for the hot plate and install that. Make sure it fits nice and tight. And then I'm going to route the cables up through this hole in the top of the frame. These telephone splice connectors are a great way to extend a cable. Simply insert them into the piece and give them a little squeeze with the pliers. Now we're going to do the same thing with the nozzle wires. We're going to run them up across the top through the same hole and connect them to our MOSFET. Once again, if we were not using the MOSFET, we would connect them to this terminal right here, but instead I've connected my control wires to my MOSFET. Next, find the cable for the extruder motor and install that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take all these wires, try to bundle them together, and wrap them over here using this cable wrap. And you'll want to leave enough slack in the line so that when the extruder is in this lowest position over here, there's plenty of length. Now we want to bundle these wires on the back of the hotbed, and once again we want to make sure there's enough slack that the bed can fully travel without pinching the cable. Now for the wires on the underside, you're going to want to make sure you feed them all through this hole next to this motor here, and make sure you send the Z2 cable in through first or you won't be able to get it through. Once again, we're going to wrap it so that these wires are covered and protected from snags. It's also a good idea to connect these cable ties to this threaded rod underneath using some of the zip ties provided. At this point, you just want to plug everything in and use the wrap just to kind of keep the spaghetti mess down. Once again, anywhere where there's possible movement, you want to leave a little slack so the motors can travel up and down without snagging the wires. Everything is labeled pretty easily if you use the right end of the cable. You just simply connect and you're good to go. For bed leveling, we're going to remove this little duct so that we can see better. And we're going to power this thing up. First thing we're going to do is hit the middle button to go to the menu, go down to Quick Settings, go down to Home All. Now you can see there's quite a gap in between the nozzle and the plate, and we're going to adjust for that. If you go into your quick settings, the very bottom setting is for disabling the stepper motors so that you can move the plate and the nozzle around. And you're going to want to move it to one of the corners, make sure that it's on the tape, and then we're going to adjust this spring to raise the plate up just enough so it can fit a single sheet of paper in between the nozzle and the tape on the bed. Yeah, I've gone around to all four corners and set it just so that a piece of paper can fit through. Now this one's actually a little further gap than I want. I want the paper to kind of drag as I push through. I'm not feeling any resistance, so I'm going to back this one out just a little bit. That way when the paper goes in, yeah, there's a little drag. You can just barely get the paper in without having to push down on the plate. I'm going to go repeat that at all four corners. Bed leveling is a very iterative process. You might have to do it 2 or 3 times. What we're going to do next, we're going to go to our home menu here, and we're going to go down to Position. And we're going to go down until we see Z position fast. We're going to go into that one, and in this position you can push the up button and raise the Z axis. Okay, now we're going to go back to our position. And we're going to hit Home All. Once again, you'll go into your quick settings and disable your stepper motors so that you can slide it across and move your table. Once again, you'll want to repeat the paper check at all four corners. Looks like this one's holding good. I'll try the other corners. Now, if you want, you can use the cradle for the PLA that comes with the kit. I recommend not doing that, maybe for your first couple prints until you get something better set up. Just look how big these spools are. The other problem is with this rod being threaded and being so small in diameter that sometimes it has a hard time pulling the PLA to the printer. So I'm going to show you what I did instead. This is the cradle I built. I just got a piece of steel pipe, and one thing when you have a 3D printer, you can do things like this. I printed a bearing carrier for each side of the spools and bought some bearings that can fit around that pipe. As you can see, it spins quite easily. Now you want to go back to your quick settings by hitting the middle button. And because I'm using PLA, we're going to use preheat PLA. Once your nozzle temperature is 190 degrees, you're ready to install the PLA. You'll want to ensure that there's a nice clean tip. So I like to cut a little angle on the end of the PLA. Then there's a little hole right here. You want to insert the PLA, and without touching the nozzle, because it's very hot, you want to pinch this down a little and insert the PLA, push it until it starts coming out of the nozzle. Then release pressure on the spring. You can see down here we've installed the PLA correctly. I found it best to feed the PLA from the top, so I put my cradle assembly on the shelf above. This works really good for prints. Once the PLA is installed, go back to the quick settings and select cool down. Be sure to reinstall the fan ducting. I just downloaded Ultimaker Cura version 4.5, which is the latest one out there. And if you go over here to add printer, you'll find that the ANET A8 is already listed in preset printers. But we do want to make some modifications, so we're going to click here on Manage Printers, and we're going to click on Machine Settings. Now I definitely recommend replacing the start and end G code with some custom code. I found on GitHub Mr. Frederickson, who was kind enough to publish his start and end G code. And what his code does that the default doesn't is, first to get started, it extrudes a little bit of plastic onto the hotbed so that the nozzle is primed and ready to go. And then his NG code turns off the fans and extruders and the hot plate. Also raises the Z-axis a little bit before it moves to a home position. So these are great settings. I will make sure to leave the link in my description. So here's a part I've designed in Fusion 360. If you haven't used Fusion 360, I highly recommend it, and I will likely be making more videos about it in the future. Anyway, we're going to take this part that I've made and we're going to export it to Cura. Here we are inside Cura, and as you can see, I'm able to move it around on the build plate. I could also rotate it in any orientation I want. However, I do want it to print in this orientation, so I'm going to leave it alone. Another thing you can do is change your file name. I'm just going to call it Dome. And you can check your settings here. We do want gradual infill. We want build plate support because we have this curvature here. And we want build plate adhesion. All that we'll cut off later with an X-Acto knife. As you can see, this part is going to take about 46 minutes to make. It's going to use 1.3 meters worth of PLA. And it's going to have a total weight of 4 grams in this configuration. Now if I wanted to speed it up a little, I can make my layers a little bit thicker. It'll recalculate, saves me a few minutes, saves me a little material, and I'm going to save this here and try it out. Alright, I've got the SD card installed in the motherboard. Usually you do this with the power off, but if you do it with the power on, you can simply hit this reset button right here and start it over. I've got the PLA preheated, and so I'm ready to print. Hit the main menu button, go down to print file, and we're going to find the G-code file and give it a go. Well, it looks like I'll be back on track to finish my solar project. The printer's working great, and hopefully you found this video to be useful. And if you have, please do me a favor, give me a thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.